if a person is maybe watching this and, they believe in the historicity of Jesus, and they would believe in the crucifixion of Jesus, what would you say to them if they're struggling with, the resurrection, if they're struggling with the idea that he really could have risen from the dead? What do you see as you've written it and you studied on it that just says to you, the resurrection really is a historical event?
I would definitely, I think, talk to them about the appearances. I'd want to talk to them about people like Peter, people like Paul, who was actually obviously, and again, a bedrock fact that he was persecuting the faith. He was completely against Christianity by his own testimony. He put Christians in prison. He tried to have them put to death. And then he had this complete turnaround. And so I would want to ask, and challenge the person and say, well, what did these people see? What did Peter and even Mary Magdalene and James, his own brother, is another one. And we know in the case of Paul, James, and Peter, they died confessing Jesus as Lord. They died because they believed what they believed. And they could have at any point just given it up. But we know they died for it. That's why they're not like 9/11 hijackers who really believed that Islam was true, or believed that jihad, and that if they did this, they would go straight to paradise. They really believed that was a faith thing, but they couldn't know that. And even I would say Christian martyrs today, they're in that same kind of situation. They have faith in Jesus and they die for him, but they have faith. That's not the case with Peter and James and Paul. Their faith became sight when they saw Jesus. And so this was an issue of they were absolutely convinced. And so you have to ask that historical question: what caused them to not only be transformed as they were, but also go to their deaths believing it? And then I would add to it all to just the rise of this Christian movement. Just what, if you just take two bare facts, just the most fundamental facts, that Jesus died on the cross, and then there was this explosive rise, this big bang rise of this movement in first century Jerusalem. What happened in between there? Something had to get that going. There had to have been a cause for that singularity. And so the only explanation that I can find that explains all the data, that in any way explains really the data, to me, is the resurrection. And so I think I say in the book, I think you have to have more faith to believe that it didn't happen than that it did, just in light of all that's happened. I mean, we have 2,000 years of hindsight. I mean, I think about some of these early Christians. I think about some of them like in the first century, or the ones that weren't apostles, that didn't know an apostle. I think about, there's this great letter that Pliny the Younger wrote. He's writing to Emperor Trajan, and he's asking about, what to do with these Christians that he's dealing with, because they won't sacrifice to the emperor. They won't confess the gods of Rome. They'll only worship this Christ, this crucified man. What do I do with them? And he talks about how he tortured two deaconesses. He calls them deaconesses. He says, I tortured these two, they call them deaconesses, these women. And they just, spouted off all this superstition, probably, would not deny Christ and would not deny that he did not rise from the dead. I think about those two women. Think about their faith. Think about how strong their faith had to have been. I mean, they didn't see Christianity as this large world movement. It was just the smallest speck of dust in the midst of this mighty Roman Empire. They heard about this man named Jesus that was crucified, and he's Lord of the world. How did they have such faith? So you just see that across the board. It's just incredible, the kind of faith you see with the Christians as you follow them and the movement throughout the last 2,000 years of history.
What's interesting too in that particular letter, that his observation to the emperor is that these Christians are meeting and they're worshiping, in a sense, they're worshiping Jesus as a deity. And exactly. So you have this really early,
as a god.
Yeah, you have this really early evidence that's outside the Bible, you might
Right.
say, in history, a letter to a Roman emperor, that already Jesus was clearly understood to be not just a prophetic figure, but a divine figure. And I think that's a pretty extraordinary piece of evidence.
I mean, there were probably just maybe tens of thousands of Christians at that point when Pliny wrote that letter. So I'm just amazed at that kind of faith, and probably what the Holy Spirit was doing in those people at those early stages that carried on. I mean, I like what G.K. Chesterton said. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, it should have ended that very night. I mean, that very hour. It shouldn't have lasted a day. I mean, it really is incredible how that movement from a crucified man went on to overtake the world.